Voice of FinTech.
Welcome to Voice of FinTech, a podcast mapping out the Swiss and global fintech scene, connecting fintech enthusiasts with startups, incubators, accelerators, business angels and VCs, and incumbents interested in partnerships. Voice of FinTech will help you navigate the fintech ecosystem. Here you can listen to the startup founder stories, what investors and incumbents are looking for when dealing with startups, and find out more about resources provided by incubators and accelerators. My name is Rudy Falad and I'll be hosting this podcast.
Hello and welcome to Voice of FinTech Live Speaker Series. In this live event, we're going to talk to our host based in Asia Pacific, Chia, based in Singapore, Angela, based in Singapore as well, Clementina, based in Medellin, Colombia, and David, based in New York, United States. And we're going to talk to them about the fintech scene in the respective regions. And we have live audience with us, so happy to take your questions and see what's cooking in LatAm, in the US, Asia Pacific, and whether that's from the perspective of founders or influencers or investors. I'd like to introduce Chia, because Chia actually studied in England. He got into Harvard, but he got an offer to join a VC in Singapore. So he's now working in Singapore. And I wanted to find out from him what attracted you to VC investing, and especially what's exciting for you in fintech in your part of the world.
Hi, folks. Good to be here. Thanks, really so much for having me. Yeah. So first question I think was around what attracted me to venture capital. Before I was in venture capital, I was operating with Rocket Internet in places like Pakistan and Sri Lanka. I was building e-commerce companies there, and I was on the ops and logistics side. So learned a lot about kind of operations, management, logistics, supply chains, et cetera. I thought that was really, really interesting. And I was the only person, I think, in my friend circle that thought e-commerce logistics was interesting. And so I got to a point where I realized I wanted to be able to learn a little bit more about other industries and other topics and other business models. And besides kind of really going deep into one specific niche. And so understood about and read up more about venture capital, really, really liked the ability to learn about different business models really quickly and dive deep into all of them at once, and really liked the breadth of thinking. And so made my way into Saison Capital as a principal not too long ago. And so that's a little bit of the journey there. Second part, I think, was about fintech in Southeast Asia. Yeah, I'm really excited about fintech in Southeast Asia. I think fintech's one of those areas where, because of a high degree of regulation and innovation, the fintech scene in every country is very different and not quite the same. So, the fintech scene in the US is very different from the fintech scene in for example, India or China or Europe. And I think Southeast Asia is also very, very much the same. And so it's not, for example, like e-commerce, where the amount of innovation is fairly standard across all geographies. But I think one of the interesting things about fintech is in Southeast Asia is, the different geographies. We've got very developed markets like Singapore sitting beside, developing markets like Philippines and Indonesia. And so you see a lot of very interesting interactions in terms of the different roadmaps that are involved, the different financial players that are present in different markets. For example, the prevalence of wallets in Indonesia and Philippines versus the prevalence of government-run rails in Singapore and India. And so I think it's always something very new to learn about. You really have to work from first principles about what would happen next in all these countries. And so that's what keeps me up at night.
Great. Well, let me jump over to Clementina as well and introduce her.
Hello, everyone.
Can you introduce yourself and also tell us why are you attracted to fintech? I mean, you could be doing so many things in Colombia, so why fintech?
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I am Clementina Giraldo, and I live in Medellin, Colombia. I have been involved in entrepreneurial ecosystem for almost 20 years in different roles, working with multilateral institutions like IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, and also CAF, Development Bank for Latin America. Also, I have been working with governments and with the private sector and startups. I have also served as a specialist in blockchain at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Colombia, affiliated with the World Economic Forum. And I am the founder and CEO of Dats and Tech. Then I have been almost 20 years in these areas. And since 2015, I found that the fintech industry has a variety of innovation that could really improve the financial services for everyone in terms of user experience, time, cost, and also Latin America is a region where there are a lot of people without financial services, and fintech could accelerate the financial inclusion. For this reason, I have been working around different programs in the regions since 2015, specifically in fintech.
Great. Well, thank you. Welcome here. And so let me go back to Chia, because I wanted to know foundations of your skill set in a way, right? You do other things, just sit in the office and work in a VC firm. You're a business angel yourself. I know you're a scout for AWS as well. But you, as people say in England, you trained as a lawyer, right? In Cambridge. So how does that all fit together? What's the logic there?
No clean logic, to be honest. It is a very different world from being on the legal side to being on the venture capital and being a startup operator building companies. But I think fundamentally for me, I was always interested in trying to understand in a very deep way how businesses worked and how you really grow a company from 0 to 100. And so that's always been a passion of mine. Throughout this whole period of my life. And so that's something that I became kind of more and more involved in, love to be able to dig deeper. And so moved from that progression of, building a particular company in a particular industry to really being in a lucky position to understand how the different businesses and different business models across the world really work. In terms of kind of other things, I have also been a little bit lucky. I'm a big fan of emerging markets, and as a result of some of my background in Rocket Internet, building e-commerce companies, have had the privilege to kind of work with a lot of marketplace and e-commerce founders in emerging markets, helping them out in my own personal capacity. Right before this call, had to work on a term sheet that one of my portfolio companies in Egypt had just received, and go through all the legal documents with them, go through all the port preserve matters, etc. And so it's always interesting being able to marry your interests and the time I spent training to be a lawyer and being able to help early stage companies. I think that's part of the fun of it.
It's all right. And so coming back to Clementina, you said that you're founder of Dots and Tech, right? So what's the goal of your company, and also how is that related to your other activities? Because you also founded the big community, FinTech Latinoamericana. So how does that all fit together with your business activities, and how do you help startups in your ecosystem?
Dots and Tech provides service that include consulting, coding, and supporting the development of the fintech ecosystem. So we are connecting the dots in the fintech industry by developing effective business strategies for corporations, investors, and startups. we support tech companies in LatAm by developing new relationships, acquiring new clients, and reaching new markets. That's the role that we have in the ecosystem.
Right, but in terms of not just the firm, but also the community. I mean, if you tell us.
Yes, of course, yes. So I founded a fintech community in 2016, almost 5 years, with the purpose of sharing opportunities and challenges of the fintech industry and the blockchain technology in the region. So the group helps to connect investors, founders, and people interested in fintech. Also, I promote different kind of activities. For example, the Digital World Trip FinTech program, which will take place in next April, where participants can access different panels, also interviews and relevant content on demand about 90 days around the key trends in the industry. And we promote different activities around the fintech industry. It was only an example.
Right.
Webinars, all around promote the community, and some of the startups have, I don't know, like they can get to know some investors or something that helps to grow, to scale.
Great. I know it's a very big community. We'll get to this a bit more. So, how big it is actually, especially if you come from Switzerland, So welcome, David, from New York. Why have you chosen this startup / entrepreneurial or scale-up route rather than a big corporate?
Yeah, Rudy, thanks so much for having me on the panel with everyone as well. And I'm very passionate about the fintech industry. I actually got started over 10 years ago in actuarial science, working for APAC, understanding how to do predictive modeling for finance, and actually started in the big corporate route. I worked for Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, ADP, and APAC for running data modeling for financial services. And I was looking to have a greater impact as technology was becoming a digital-first society. So I moved from Florida to New York City over 6 years ago, got involved in the startup and scale-up industry, both as a digital leader to raise capital for companies, as well as accelerate their digital innovation, primarily around financial portfolios. So I helped launch a 3-on-3 sports league. I launched a media tech company. And then I got directly involved with financial companies like Bloomberg, Refinitiv, Charles Schwab, Invesco, USAA, on training and building their software engineers and data scientists around financial and data literacy. Beyond that, prior to the pandemic, traveled the world very regularly, doing cross-border innovation around financial startups in Israel, in Korea, in Singapore, and other global markets. And particularly, today I actively advise different fintech startups that are working on raising their Series Seed and Series A rounds. I think fintech is the unifier of all startups around the world because currency and technology move together.
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction. We have Angela on as well. Can you hear us?
Sure can. How are you, Rudy?
Yeah. Hi. So Angela is a fantastic host and entrepreneur based in Singapore. We'll get more to this, but my first question is, well, you're an Australian among, obviously the other nationalities that you have. And as I said, now you're summering in New Zealand, which some of us would envy you. So that's a nice lifestyle for a founder. And but I wanted to know, what led you to Singapore? Now Singapore is trying to, or is getting more and more established as the fintech nation, right? So, how did you see it before you were in Singapore, and how do you see it now that you're there?
Sure. So I originally came to Singapore because I worked in the oil and gas industry for most of my career, and it was a good hub, that in Vancouver. And coming from London, I decided that I couldn't do winter anymore. So the greener pastures of Singapore were sort of calling with the weather. But since arriving there, I think Singapore punches above its weight in so many factors in terms of the leadership of the global community, in terms of the fintech, but also the regional community as well. So I think from us, it's a no-brainer to start a business there, really. It's a really supportive community and a really supportive ecosystem.
Right, and you're CEO and the co-founder of Notarum, right, which is a RegTech company. We can get to this. What are your solutions or what are the problems that you've seen? But it is tough to be a startup founder, I think, and RegTech doesn't really strike me as the easiest field, right? So why you want to do RegTech?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I started the company because I had the very specific pain point in my previous role in the corporate world. And I couldn't believe that this is the way the global community was solving this problem. And so I figured technology was a much better solution. And so I kind of saw the writing on the wall as well, knowing that I think the global community is going to solve this problem through technology, and I'm going to be out of a job. So I may as well be the one to start the company. So that was kind of my moment.
Right. So, you're based in Singapore normally, right? As Chia is. So I wanted to jump over to him again, and because I know, Chia, that you're looking at the opportunities in Southeast Asia outside of Singapore a lot, right? So how would you describe the scene, let's say, in Indonesia and other countries outside of Singapore versus Singapore itself?
Yeah, no, I think a great question. Yeah, so I do cover quite a few geographies. I cover Southeast Asia, I cover India, and also I look after our US FinTech LP investments. And so I think it's always really fascinating looking at the different markets between Southeast Asia. Within Southeast Asia, right, you have a very small market in Singapore of, really 6 million people. Average GDP per capita is about 55,000 US. So it's a fairly developed but very small market compared to some a country like Indonesia, for example. With close to 300 million people, and a different kind of income profile, and so and it's very different dynamics. I think in Singapore, you have consumer facing. You have a very high level of sophistication in terms of consumer products, in terms of enterprise products, with a lot of the MNCs really headquartered in Singapore. Whereas in a country like Indonesia, they're still really building out some of the basic rails out there. And with the only recent establishment of kind of dominance of wallet players, and payment rails, you're really now starting to see a bunch of very interesting 2.0 fintechs really come out and take advantage of all of that. So it's very different stage of development, very different types of opportunities in each market. I would say at the moment there's a lot of really interesting B2B opportunities happening in the Indonesian space. You're seeing your first wave of fintech B2B infrastructure plays really start to emerge in Indonesia right now, when 2 to 3 years ago that wouldn't have been really possible or feasible, because they're still solving basic problems around merchant payment and acceptance, e-money movement, blah blah blah. So really, really exciting, I think, things that are going on in Indonesia in terms of what this first wave of B2B digitalization in the fintech scene looks like, and the second wave of B2C. Whereas in Singapore, I think it's more, a lot of it has to do with more kind of back end, large enterprise processes, and that tends to be what the opportunity really looks like. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to dive into all of that, and that's on a high level what we've been looking at.
All right, understood. Well, I mean, let's follow up on this, because you mentioned that different countries, they are at a different stage of development. But what are the hottest industry verticals within fintech? Is this now going to be B2B fintech, RegTech as well in Indonesia and other countries outside of Singapore, or are there other more specific, verticals that you would like to recommend if there are investors among us?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are three main themes that really excite me at the moment. I think the first is really around B2B cross-border. I think is one of that. Second order digitization. The first order being a lot of these merchants have recently digitized, recently gotten used to digital methods of payments, of operating, of selling, etc. And so now a lot now we're moving more into the back end and trying to understand some of these back end processes for SMEs in Indonesia and Singapore, and seeing how that cross-border flow can be better digitized, be it escrow, payments, et cetera, et cetera. I think another thing that is pretty exciting at the moment is, given the success of Afterpay and a lot of BNPLs. I think BNPL is heated up pretty much everywhere, and Singapore and Indonesia is no exception. I think in the past 3 months, I've read more about the BNPL scene in Singapore than I have anywhere, than I have any other time in my life. And so I think that's also a really interesting space to play. I think the last thing that I think is really interesting is that, again, I think mentioned this before, but the first wave of infrastructure plays are really setting up shop. So you've got your Plaid, your Maketas of Indonesia, of Southeast Asia really popping up and trying to do a bunch of things. You've got your first wave of neobanks being set up with digital licenses being granted in Singapore. In Philippines, just a week ago, they finally released the regulatory scheme for the new digital licenses, banking licenses that they're going to issue. And so I think we're also going to see that wave of neobanks really start to heat up in Southeast Asia. And those are some of the areas that I think are pretty exciting to look at the moment.
Brilliant. So let me jump over again to David, because you have some experience with podcasting, right? You're a host of Humane Podcast. So I wanted to know, and that's also for the benefit of everyone else, what is the objective of your podcast, right? And what were your favorite episodes or experiences, from doing it?
I love communicating with founders, startup executives all over the place, and much to what we're talking about here today. I've had the Humane Podcast focused around AI, data science, and developer tools for now over 2 years. We've had going on over 100 episodes with different startups raising their Series A, Series B, and beyond, and even exiting. And what I love is conversations about how technology is integrating with humans. It's so important. Recently this week, I also released an episode with Felipe Langer, who is the CTO of Play Magnus, the app that Magnus Carlsen became a world chess player with using AI. So it's really lovely.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, did you watch the show on the Netflix, about the Queen's Gambit, right?
Huge fan of Queen's Gambit. We recorded the episode prior to Queen's Gambit. We were talking more about, how do you train? How can you train with AI, become even better as an athlete, taking that mental fortitude forward. Queen's Gambit's a great show. If anyone has not seen on Netflix yet, of course, there's all the drama and entertainment of great Netflix flicks. But it definitely brought back the nostalgia of when I played at our secondary school chess club. Playing blitz chess was always a fun.
Right. And, that drove a lot of users to chess.com, I've heard. And so now I'm getting these emails. You can actually play against Beth Harmon on chess.com.
That's right. So chess.com's been around for, of course, many years as the online chess tournament website, but partnered with Defied. And beyond that, they have different computers, different AIs you can play with. So based on all of Beth's games, an AI for different age groups have been trained. So when you join chess.com for free, you can play her when she was 8 years old, 12 years old, 15, 17, and a grandmaster, which is so exciting for all of us chess loyalists.
So Clementina, coming back to you, because we started talking about that you are active in the community in FinTech in Colombia or in LatAm, right? And we discussed that, what does that mean, Iberoamericana, right, which is LatAm and Spain. And there was a list recently came out who lists the top Colombians in terms of FinTech influence or being active as a FinTech influencers in Iberoamericana, so Spain and LatAm. So you were in top 10 influencers there. So how do you do it? I mean, building on what you just said before about the community, the startup work, and what are the goals and in your activities all together? Let's maybe take it even more high level.
Yes, I have been working with different programs like a mentor for startups. I was living in Argentina for 7 years, and they have Argentina is a hub for blockchain technology. So I was involved in they have, for example, the La BitConf, which is an event specific for blockchain. And I have been working with, before with CAF, which is a development bank, and they invest in some venture capital funds. Some of them are invested in fintech industry in Latin America. And also I work this year and last year with IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, helping them and the central bank from Honduras to create an innovation roundtable around fintech, connecting the startups with the government to understand the government wanted to understand that industry. So I was helping them to identify how many startups they have in Honduras. Honduras is in Central America. So, and this year I have been working with 7 countries in Central America with IDB. So I have been working with governments, with the multilaterals, with the startups, with my company. I am teacher, but I am professor in an Argentine university in a fintech program. All the day and every day I am working with fintech. That's the reason that maybe they consider me in that list.
We have first question from audience, so I think that may be probably the most targeted at Chia or David, but so I'll just read it out. It's basically one of the participants here asking about which of the fintech industry verticals would most benefit from reduced latency. In other words, similarly as you have high frequency traders in traditional trading. So I'll have you to think about it, Chia and David, and in the meantime, I would ask Angela about corporate diligence and the solution that her company came up with, because having spent some time in M&A, let's say, I spent a lot of time doing due diligence, and often it is an exercise of one's stamina. So how do you make it a little bit easier on people while not losing the quality, right? Or because it's important, obviously. It's crucial to allocate risk between the parties. You cannot miss stuff and things like this. So I think people were always hesitant to give it to some early stage technology where there would be a gap, and then you cannot tell your boss, well, I missed it because some algorithm didn't pick it up in the data room and things like this. So where are we today with these automated solutions so that the M&A bankers can do something maybe more value added, which is arguably negotiating?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from our point of view, we did a huge amount of customer validation before we designed the platform and really started to build anything. And in that, we realized the 2 biggest problems were the fragmentation of the industry. So when you do have a piece of data, you have to plug that into many different databases throughout the whole process to get to the end. So it is really an exercise in stamina, as you said. And the other one was that you're relying on the data from the customer. So basically, you're asking the person you're checking to be honest. And as we know with people that are dishonest, that's generally they won't kind of just change because you've asked them a question. So what we do is we connect with company registries in 150 different countries globally, meaning that we have a solution that serves the global ecosystem as well, because the other problem was that companies would have to go to each individual company registry globally to try and access the information. So it's through bringing all of those databases, there's around about 300 under one umbrella, and putting a workflow on top that's intuitive and has some AI in the back. That's what we've done to really help solve this problem.
All right, something to check out once you're in that situation in a dark room, or and see if you can do it better. So I don't know, Chia, David, if you're volunteers for that question on latency.
It's an interesting question. I'd be curious on context. I think the 2 that immediately come to mind would be any delays on payment processing, especially on the consumer side, results in card abandonment, right? So better performance on checkout and payments, especially around e-com. I think that's always super useful. Interestingly, spent the past couple of months looking deeply into the kind of one-click checkout model. I think the second one that immediately comes to mind is anything to do with brokerages online. I think obviously kind of that's always an obvious space where latency produces quite good ROI. I'll pause there and hope that answers the question.
Okay. All right.
So I think it's such a good question about latency because it's really a technology problem. And what I spend a lot of my daytime on every day now is actually around latency. As of a couple months ago, I joined formerly MemSQL, which is single store. We just raised this week our 80 million Series E round of equity. And what we do is we're a distributed SQL company. We work with some of the top banks in the United States, the top tech companies like Uber, General Electric, and helping them understand SiriusXM around streaming, around movement of people and data, how to get near real-time transactions and analytics. So I think if you're coming from a fund in the fintech space, it's very much all about the ETL process, and particularly where is that latency occurring? Is it when you're extracting or loading data? Is it when you're performing your transforms and analytics with SQL queries? And how you can make those pipelines be more robust. I think the solution definitely is something around multi-cloud strategy. I think everyone's moving towards multi-cloud, whether you're using GCP, Azure, AWS, Alibaba Cloud, Huawei Cloud, or many of these other options. We're moving to a one metal but all services tech stack. So I'd encourage you for your organization as you're thinking about latency. What are you solving for? Are you solving for hours for your SLA? Are you solving for seconds, nanoseconds, picoseconds? And how large scale is that data? One of our customers we're working with a few weeks ago, for one of their queries, they use 100 petabytes of data. So for them, latency matters, right? And their SLA is 0, right? Like you need 100% upkeep all the time. So depending what you're doing, start with the SLA, and you can work backwards from there in the technology.
Right. And I wanted to follow up though on what you just said, that you joined a new company for you, that is, single store, right? So you came from data science and AI, and now you're education specialist, right? So what does that mean? You're educating whom? The external clients or your sales force at single store? How does that go, fit together?
Yeah, so my role here is particularly under client technical services. So I'm involved with delivery. That's everything from pre-sales and post-sales, really with the client experience. I'm also taking that knowledge and transforming that internally in the organization with internal enablement, sales enablement, and partnership enablement. So it's really exciting. And I think for any startup, as they're scaling, a startup to a scale-up, it's important that you're cross-pollinating ideas all across the organization. And that's where I'm coming in as this digital leader to ensure as we go from 200 people to 1,200 people, that we're able to maintain that culture and the unity of our technology and information.
All right. Hopefully that is a bit clearer than it was before, right? Because, when you think education, in some places people think in shortcuts and they think about school, right? And that's not necessarily always the case. There's also corporate education, EdTech, and you can marry it with data science and AI, just like you do on business development. So that's great. Now, that I think would be a good segue again to jump over to Angela, because she's been listed on the list of top 100 women in Singapore. What I'd like to know is, I know you said when you got on the list that this is a small but might group of women, but what can we do to make it bigger? Now let's think about going back even early on in terms of education and encouraging people to go to STEM. Maybe it is watching Queen's Gambit, I don't know, but whatever we can do so that we actually don't have such a list, to be honest. Maybe it shouldn't be anything exceptional, right? It should be absolutely normal.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think It definitely goes back to STEM to get more women into the industry as well. But I don't have a STEM background, so I think a lot of it is the industry being more welcoming, but it's also, we as females need to take responsibility as well and have, courage to give it a go as well. And I think that's something that we both need to kind of attack it from both sides. What I really like about the ecosystem, particularly in Singapore, is that it is very welcoming for everyone pretty much. One other thing that I think is really important for women, everyone in general, though, is that a lot of people decide to help women through mentorship and through kind of, just going through and reviewing something, but very few people actually roll up their sleeves. So it's that difference between I call it hour one, which was sitting with someone and having a conversation, and hour two, which is where you actually help and actually add value by addressing their questions specifically. Because I think a lot of the time when we're allocated, mentors through these mentorship programs, it's great and people are, very willing to kind of provide their advice, but not as many people are willing to go that second hour and roll up their sleeves and really get into the nitty gritty of you and your organization and how they can impact you specifically. So I think if, to any mentors out there, that's definitely where the value add comes in, is in that second hour.
Right. So from your position as a founder as well, just building on what David said, him working with sales and pre-sale and those sort of fields of a larger company at this point. But how do you do it in terms of B2B sales? And that's also, I'd like to maybe nudge you to comment on what Chia said about B2B getting more and more prevalent in the region in Southeast Asia. So what's your advice about B2B sales? If I'm a fintech, I'm very early stage, and I'd like to sell my RegTech solution like yourself to the big banks in Singapore or professional services firms. Maybe let's explain also who are your key clients. What are the key pieces of advice you can give so that this can be done more quickly, especially, right? And obviously more successfully, right?
Yeah, it certainly is an exercise in stamina. I think that's a second example of that tonight. So just say, I think we as an organization, anything you can provide to large corporates to help them shepherd the process through their organization as well is really useful. So any sort of tools or any advice on our value add really helps, because we're not just pitching to one person when we go in to do a sales pitch. We're pitching to one person to then take our company all the way up the value chain of their organization. So I think that's really important. And the second piece of advice is, don't underestimate how complex the existing infrastructure is at these organizations. So I think there's anything you can do with your platform to make it integration friendly is a really useful thing for large organizations, particularly in the financial services sector.
All right, taken on board. If you want to do a B2B, it looks like the Chia is saying this is the way to go. You will have less competition. People haven't done it until now so much in Southeast Asia. Chia, I noticed recently that you've asked for feedback, I think, on your writing on Medium, right? So that's another of your hobbies. So why such a productive hobby? Sometimes people work hard, they want to play hard, and it looks like you are working hard all the time, right?
Thanks a lot, Rudy. Yeah, no, I've always liked writing. I think maybe it's the ex-law person in me speaking. But I think a lot of tech, a lot of venture capital is quite opaque, and I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case. So I like to be able to expose a little bit about how I think about the different business models, about different industries, about how venture capital works, and put that out there. And I think what I found is that, number one, it's really helped me structure the way I think about certain arguments, about certain business models, and sometimes I catch myself making assumptions that I shouldn't be in the course of writing these articles about different models like embedded finance, etc., etc. And I think the second additional advantage has been it's also been great to connect with other founders and investors who read some of this writing and reach out, and we have a great chat about different their opinions and their feedback and where they may or may not disagree. And I think that's also been a great way to really quickly, openly build and refine on the way that you think about different business models, especially when it's more innovative and the answer is less clear. And so it's definitely a painful hobby, for sure, but it's been a great I think way to learn and get feedback really quickly, especially given how difficult long feedback loops in venture capital is.
Right. I just discovered like a year ago, right? Or more than a year and a half ago. I like it because it makes it easy to write. But I think the most important thing is the content and the feedback, as you mentioned. So check out Chia on Medium if you subscribe to Medium. So I would turn back again. I'm doing a back and forth on purpose, so you can see that actually there is one thing in common here in fintech is that generally you come out from a small country, small business. It's a niche thing. You need to scale up, and for this you need to go international. So that's why on purpose I'm jumping from one region to another, so you can see that the issues or the advice could be useful either way or similar. But I wanted to check with Clementina as well, not necessarily by industry verticals, but which are the hottest countries in LatAm that you think that we should follow in terms of fintech? Is this Argentina, or is this Colombia or Chile or Mexico? The obvious choices, the big countries, or is there somebody that Uruguay has more founders per capita than anybody else? I don't know.
Latin America is a region over 2,000 companies, fintech companies in different stages of development. And Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia leads the industry. Brazil has 70 and 100 startups in fintech. Mexico, over 500 startups in fintech. Argentina, 280 startups in fintech, and Colombia, 250. In terms on unicorns, Brazil is leading the industry. They have Nubank, is from Brazil, but it's important to say that the founder is Colombian. It's from Colombia.
Yeah.
David Vélez is from Colombia. And we have important players from those countries. So we have, for example, we have Mercado Libre, is from Argentina, and has been creating a complete ecosystem. So depends on if we are talking about numbers of startups, we have some leaders. If we are talking about unicorns, then Brazil and Argentina. And if we are talking about blockchain technology, is definitely Argentina the hub. And Colombia has very good player in the ecosystem. For example, Rappi is from Colombia and is leading the industry in the region also.
Right. I mean, obviously, from Europe, you hear about the unicorns, but you're right, it's about the different metrics as well. I think in Zurich, altogether, we have about 500 startups. In Lausanne, about 300, but that's not just fintech, that's anything and everything, right? So you see the power of the scale and scaling up. Here, I think if you ever want to be a unicorn, there's no other way than plan for going abroad as soon as possible. Maybe as we're coming to an end, I'll turn back again to David on giving advice to startups and things like this, because in addition to your work, I know you're also advisor to startups, right? So what have you seen that you can share that you think others can replicate so they get better, whatever that means, better serve customers or growing more quickly, getting a bigger valuation and retire in Florida, or I don't know what. But depends how you want to define it. But in any case, what is your key advice you could give from working with startups?
If you're an early stage startup that's still building product market fit, biggest advice I give is let's build that product market fit. And that means as a startup, building technology, building product. If you're after valuation, you go after SaaS. It's hands down. You're just going to raise your multiple. But if you're after building the product that you're passionate for your industry, you want to get that product market fit. Iterate very quickly, iterate a lot, test a lot with your customers, and keep building out those features to see the results. It's not just the product though. You could have a world-class Silicon Valley product and never get to exit. It is so much about the persistence of your team, the discipline, the culture. I mean, Brian, the founder of Airbnb, says it's all the best, right? And they're going public now this week, actually, I believe today. He says, don't mess up the culture. That's the Disney PG version of it, right? You have to start with culture and then build a product. Some of the best companies I am advising and I work for, the product is not necessarily 10x better than the competition, but the execution is. So I'd encourage you as a team to make sure your team is tight-knit. You're constantly evolving that product and speaking to your customers so that you can grow your business.
Good point. Let's focus on the solution, on the customers, right? Step by step, what matters most. And otherwise, you will never get there. But I got the comment from the audience about a 7-year-old in the background was asking why we are all so concerned with the unicorns. So I had to really show you my unicorn tears mug, which I don't use because I don't really have unicorn tears. When I was somewhere at some event, and you had a good answer to questions, you would get also the unicorn as a gift. With that, I mean, I'd love to thank everyone for the questions, but we can stay on and network in a less formal way. So I maybe last challenge or last call for the questions. If you have it, you can put it in the chat or just tell us. I will promise I will unmute you. If you have any questions for Angela, Clementina, Chia, or David. Tanya, unfortunately, from India couldn't make it today, but she sends her regards, and there will be a new episode next week from India, which is great. Next time we'll talk as well. One other thing I wanted to say is that we'll add more hosts in the regions, and the obvious region that is missing is Africa. So stay tuned for this. There will be hosts based in Africa. They're locals. They know what's going on. And I'm sure we can also think about different sort of problems or issues or solutions and ideas that come from there as well. So you will hear about that next week also. Clementina.
Yes, I only wanted to say you some little details about these unicorns. Yes, because to give you an idea, Mercado Libre is leading the e-commerce in the region, reaching 76 million users. So is Mercado Libre of 17 million are new of the third quarter. So with COVID-19, the growth has been amazing and is really a leader in the region. So they have an ecosystem. They have Mercado Crédito for loans, Mercado Pago for the payment, and they have Mercado Envíos for logistics. So they have the complete ecosystem. And also, for example, Nubank. Nubank is from Brazil, but they expanded to Mexico this year, and they announced recently its entrance to Colombia with the expectation to reach 30 million users by the end of this year. So Rappi from Colombia has been the alliance for the small and medium enterprises during the quarantine, helping to maintain their business activity and launching its new credit card for consumers. So they are moving in other verticals. In Latin America, we are seeing that at the beginning, the fintech were in only a vertical, but now some of them are moving to other verticals, like complete with the diverse services and products. And the last one is a very interesting case, is Bitso. Bitso from Mexico is a cryptocurrency trading platform expanded to Argentina this year, reaching over 4 million users. in Latin America, talking about cryptocurrency and 4 million users is really huge for us, and is leading remittances from between Mexico and the US. So it's a very important company for Mexican and now in Argentina, and raising recently $62 million for scaling the cryptocurrency adoption in the region. So it's a very important player, and we are expecting that in 2021 we will see more cryptocurrency in Latin America. So I wanted to say you that to give you the details about the unicorns.
Right. So I've heard that at the conference, which is Landed LatAm going on this week as well, that COVID loves e-commerce. So it helped a lot in terms of adoption of e-commerce and also the digital transformation or contactless payments, and even using accounts and debit cards in the region, right, in Mexico and in other countries. But one of the founders there was saying, well, we should also look into Europe and look at how the open banking has been pushed by either the governments or the ecosystem. And that's to your question that we've got now from the audience. How can a fintech build a solution using open banking for processing payments from the legal perspective in LATAM? So I don't know whether there is a platform, there is a framework in LATAM already to kind of push the open banking. In other words, if I'm a fintech or I'm a client and I want my data from some big bank in Colombia or Mexico to be transferred to a fintech, are they obligated to do it?
We are on the way of open banking in the region.
Okay.
But each country is at a different level of, you can find some closed ecosystem, another open bank, like going to open banking.
In Europe also, the open banking, it was left to implementation by member countries of EU differently. So people did it differently. In Switzerland also, we are taking a bit longer to do it because it wasn't government-led, but it was more community consensus-led effort. So that's to another question that we've got. Any final words? I think, maybe let's go to Angela, because I really would like to appreciate that you stay up so late. I know it's tough to find the time that works for everyone, but you're the furthest from Clementina, I guess, now.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Chia, I guess, and just back on the unicorns. I think from our perspective, everyone, when you're building a startup, it's all about trying to build a unicorn. But I was wondering if you're seeing any change from the venture capital society where they're looking less at unicorns and maybe at faster exits at lower valuation. Has there been any change? We're sort of hearing a few things around the place that's what venture capital firms are more interested in, given they've seen how quickly the world can change. Is that something you're seeing, or is that just
I'd be very curious. I suspect it's a very specific profile of people that might be saying that. The short answer is no. Capital.
So still chasing the unicorns.
Yeah, I mean, capital has never been cheaper. Valuations have very much returned. And actually, in a lot of measures, higher than what it was pre-pandemic. So, from my perspective, the world is still the same, just more expensive.
Yeah. What a rocky road it's been for the last 12 months, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm happy to dive deeper into that point. I do have a suspicion on the type of people that might be saying that.
Yeah, I think it was, I'd be keen to hear your suspicions, but it was sort of micro funds. So I think they were looking at shorter fund lengths. Is that, so what
Yeah, so I mean, what's happening is we are very bullish on micro funds. We've been investing and looking to the space because we are also LPs. The number of micro funds that, especially in fintech, that have been set up across throughout 2020 has certainly exploded. And I think one common misconception a lot of first-time GPs have when they're setting up micro funds is, I need to show DPI, right, which is realized returns, which is not actually necessarily true. But I do hear that a lot from my first-time micro funds.
Really interesting.
Okay.
Thanks, Chia.
We have another question as investors. Which vertical do you see within fintechs? Do you see the most interest in? I think we kind of talked about it already. It depends on the region, it depends on the country as well. But yeah, so Chia, maybe if you have any hottest vertical you want to talk about, think about it. In the meantime, I'll ask David about his podcast once again, because it's called Humane. It's about AI. A lot of the times people, when they think of AI in the popular culture, they are a bit afraid that this will take away their jobs and things like this. I mean, what is your view on this automation versus, what will humans do? Will we end up just watching Netflix, but who's going to pay for it? That's another problem, right?
Yeah, a lot of what we've seen, especially during the pandemic, has been that technology has not slowed down. We've used technology more than ever before, whether it's the cloud, whether it's streaming platforms, or using any software that's using data augmentation. And that's the biggest theme that I talk about on the Humane podcast, is that humans and machines can and will work together. We're not having AI replace humans, but we're thinking about a lot of the manual, repetitive tasks that happen. That can we automate that? And for us as financial professionals who work with the spreadsheets and the macros, automation has been part of our everyday language for years. It's now taking that to be more standardized and reproducible, so that when it comes to code, you can up your game and build more powerful projects. So I think that's what we're really seeing happening. And I think the next decade, at least in the AI space, will not be eliminating humans. We saw, of course, yesterday, SpaceX's S-89, that rocket had a very good chance to get up in the air, but of course exploded when it hit the Earth in the Houston, Texas area, so in the Boca area. So I think we have a long ways to go there. I think it's really about collaboration.
Brilliant. So that's a great message, before we wrap up and before the end of this year, which has been quite a disaster, right? So a lot of people saying that we can't wait to be in 2021. I hope that will be a better year, but frankly, I'm not really betting on it, but maybe I'm being too pessimistic. Angela answered in the meantime, what's the hottest vertical? It's obviously RegTech. Chia, do you have anything else? Do you have any other sector other than, a bit more specific than B2B fintech?
I've been pretty interested in what I like to call the last mile distribution of B2B payments. So, how do you embed B2B payment solutions into existing workflow software, HR, accounting, et cetera, and so that's been a pet topic of mine that I'm really keen on. Okay,
cool. And Clementina, what would be your biggest hope in fintech in LatAm? What would you like to see next year happening? Whether that's more unicorns or whether that's...
Yes, I think so, because
the real one.
SoftBank moved the region. SoftBank had been investing in Rappi, in Confio from Mexico. Mexico is a very interested ecosystem because they have some players growing. Click for is the payment vertical. It's an interesting company. Also, Confio, Crece. There are some companies in the digital credit for small and medium enterprise growing a lot. Simply, Finactiva from Colombia. We are, and also some providers like for B2B, like cybersecurity. For example, VU Security from Argentina is an interesting company. So we are, Latin America is like expanding, is growing. There is a lot of movement around the industry. So we will see new players getting an important space in the world. I think so.
Brilliant. So you just did an episode with Crece from Mexico, right? And before it was with the leaders from Argentina and Colombia. So there's more to come. So check it out. As I said, India's coming next, but there will be more from LatAm. There will be more from APAC in the next year as well, in the US. So thank you very much all for joining. stay tuned, for the other announcements. There will be, as I said, the Africa's coming up, and we'll do more episodes for you. And lastly, the objective of this session was so that you see that Angela, Clementina, Chia, David, they are in the regions, they are experts in their area, in their domain areas. So if you'd like to know more, I'm sure they'll be happy to connect with you. So find them on LinkedIn or Twitter, see what they're up to, and listen to their podcasts, or if they do other ones as well, but only after you downloaded everything from Voice of FinTech, obviously. So thank you so much all for joining, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rudy.
you very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Voice of FinTech podcast. If you haven't already, check out also voiceoffintech.com, where you will find all the episodes and additional resources related to the podcast. You can also subscribe to Voice of FinTech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or any other podcast app that you like. If you have any suggestions on the topics or guests, or how to make this podcast better for you, please email us at info@voiceoffintech.com. Happy to hear from you. Thank you.